medical education, research, and innovation.
Good afternoon, and thank you for the kind invitation to share some thoughts. Of course, I teach medical physics in this first semester, so we decided to do something more general and take it together with the much of our research activities that we are doing in the school and in the lab. So I'll try to speak about education and specifically education research and innovation. But why education research? Because basically we want to underpin scientifically our education practice. But also we want to use education research, and specifically medical education research, as an educational development engine where our staff development can be later on be based on. And therefore, glimpses and also elements of what we produce here are also feeding the trainer's course every single year, and they are updating stuff about the findings and the tools and the technological developments, etc. It is also a way in the last few years to improve the use and development of new technologies, educational research per se. And as such, in difficult times like the ones that we have been experiencing in the last couple of years, perhaps drive communities of practice, given the good practice elements and also advice to avoid bad practice elements like with Zoom or other non-Zoom teaching telco machines that we had in the past. And also provide alternatives, obviously. If you know what works and what doesn't work based on research, then you can basically have different things to experiment or to apply. And therefore, it's a kind of a loop where we basically see education research as a tool, as I mentioned, as an engine to drive educational development. And if you want to sort of have it in a similar way, like Areti showed earlier, what Miller's pyramid is about teaching students, well, when you have a medical education research, you also have a pyramid, which according to publications in this area, teaching is the basis, but then developing education further or coordinating education is some more advanced elements of this pyramid. But also manage and implement educational programs and new introduction of new curricula, or perhaps accrediting new curricula is something more. If you want to teach about education is a bit higher in the level, and this is where we have it in the trainer course. And then I think the top of the pillar is completed with education research per se. And if in the right-hand side you see a continuum in medical education where the available knowledge is a lot perhaps in undergraduate training, but it's not a lot in postgraduate training, MSc courses, and perhaps a bit less in continuous professional development, where we also need the research to provide findings. Where do we find these research results? In journals, obviously. There are academic education research, medical education research journals, which host articles and practices and a lot of results from this domain. Some of them used to be very low impact factor possessing journals, but in the last few years they have been advancing more and more some of these. And the basic society that we sort of are linked with and drives this a lot of these activities and research, medical education research and practice and innovation. It's the AMI, the so-called Association of Medical Education in Europe, which is composed of probably something more than 4,000 members around the globe. And it's not only Europe. Every single year, and this year will happen in Lyon, it attracts these few thousand people which share their knowledge and experiences about this. And when I say we need evidence to be built, let me give you just an example of what we have sort of been given in a recent collaboration we had. We need to provide the evidence, as I will explain. I think the slides got mixed here. And when we apply a technological tool, for example, we need to assess what is the learning gain. And therefore, if you want to say something is good or bad evidence, you need to accumulate the results that show this. And you see some of these experimentations in this paper. In the right-hand side, you see the comparison of using virtual reality elements in teaching, for example, neuroanatomy, as opposed to that which is using, again, technological means, but not virtual and mixed reality per se, but YouTube videos and animations and videos, etc. And all you want to provide is cost effectiveness or learning effectiveness results, for example. So who should do research and why? Probably everybody is sort of belonging to the research and academic community in medical education, like teachers and clinicians, probably supported by technical staff, which in famous or other universities around the globe, they are called educational or medical education technologists. We have 0 so far in our university, and we are hoping to populate this sort of expertise area as well. And how we do this? We collaborate, obviously, or we team, and we develop practices, and we build infrastructures. And you saw the clinical skills labs, which is a result of some probably 15 or 17 years efforts to establish such a lab. Now we are populating it with more and more elements and digital elements to collect more evidence and fund this research. So I don't want to expand, but we have a good track record in attracting funding for medical education per se. It's probably more than 15-year track record on funding some of these elements and much more, perhaps. But we started with a big program in the period where Professor Dobros used to be the head of the school, and we drove this best practice network for medical education, where we developed technologies, experiments with students and staff that populated later on much of what we use today. For example, virtual patients or problem-based learning, or a pool of cases that we haven't, perhaps we're not using it in the curriculum every day, but other schools, we have been informed during the pandemic, have been using our cases to teach their own students. And this is a good element of practice. I'll skip this to save time and focus on a little bit of 2 of the currently running projects, research projects, funded research projects, which participate. One of them is called Escape for Health. Escape for Health is an Erasmus Plus funded project, which I technically coordinate. And you see the Association of Medical Education in Europe is a partner in this one, together with other institutions in Europe. What do? We want to create educational practices based on escape rooms. Physical, but also virtual, mixed reality or augmented reality things. So in the next few months, we are hoping to utilize examples that someone can imagine, or, it's just in the imagination of someone to dream that things like this can be used in education. But we are trying to devise scenarios that will populate our teaching, and emphasis will be given then in the learning outcomes of this effort. So the scenario that we are creating is a cruise in the famous cruiser here you see, and perhaps the program can provide us with tickets that we can get on board with this. I'm only kidding. This is some of the experimentation we do now to develop these escape room learning outcomes and the technicalities. You see one of the mannequins which we have been exchanging with the clinical skills lab and the people in HEPA to enable some of these experimentations, and also equipment that simulates signals, etc., etc. We co-create this with our students and our staff. So this is another research process in these projects. Finally, in another one that we coordinate is to foster these patient-centered communication skills by enforcing problem-based and scenario-based learning and comparing it with standardized patients and the usual clinical skills practice. So the aim will be to enrich medical education curricula by building competencies around these, competencies around communication skills with patients or social responsibilities, etc. And you have, this is just a screenshot on how third-party countries like the ones in Kazakhstan, for example, that you see here, work with us to co-develop these cases and provide elements for their own curricula based on what we have and based on what other European partners have. To conclude, we need always to have in mind that education, medical education research is all about building evidence, which then can drive good practice. Without using educational theory and evidence is like treating patients without clinical evidence in the clinical practice domain. And education development can and should go hand in hand with education research, obviously. Lots of technologies around. They need proof of usefulness and cost-effective or learning effectiveness approval. And that's what I showed earlier on in a glimpse of one of the projects. Obviously, more research is needed in work-based learning and placement learning environments. And we have also a project which we will enable our students to get involved and provide with us tools that we can use in the next few years to do research on this last domain, as I said. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Professor Bamίδis, for this excellent talk. And we will go on with Professor Φόρογλου, who is actually coordinating the English